ecology, led by Jessica Stanton, that had as its focus the incorporation of uncertainty into the population sizes. So one of the key updates too was that we had temporal improvements. So these data were from 2006 to 2015, as opposed to almost a decade earlier. The addition of those uncertainty bounds really made the numbers a lot more credible rather than just a fixed number that was artificially precise. And then also in this edition, there was the incorporation of some independent expert reviewed population estimates for other species that didn't really fit that standard model. So there were species that breed largely outside Canada and the US, like blue throat or tropical kingbird, for which it was possible to derive estimates and include them. And other cases where, with really focused management, like California condor, there was a really precise number available. It certainly didn't come out of all of the models, but it made sense to report it. So that's the database is still out there. If you go to the website and tap into the database, it's the version 3.1 numbers that you'll come out with. But even at the time that that was published, there were some limitations that were identified. One of them, which was quite significant, was that the time of day and pair adjustments in the model were acknowledged as not being perfect. Well, I mean, they're never going to be perfect, but they were areas where improvement was acknowledged as being a priority. And equally, there was recognition that the distance adjustment was something that needed future attention. So in the model where we're taking observations from a given distance and then translating that into area, your distance estimate essentially becomes squared. And so any imprecision in that gets magnified in the calculation. There's been a general understanding for a while now that the distance classes that the birds were put into in this previous iteration and the ones prior to it even, those distance classes generally are on the large side compared to empirically derived estimates for a given species. And so what that means when you run it through the calculation is that the population estimates derived from the model tend to be conservative or on the low side compared to some of the other estimates that have been put out there. So that was something that we knew needed to be worked on. And also kind of in the discussion of the last version, there was this recognition that having a model rooted solidly in the BBS was a viable approach at the time, but with the way that things were going, we could foresee that on the horizon, having a more spatially explicit pixel-based model that can take into account habitat, roadside biases, and the or realistically the availability of species for modeling would be the way to go. So those were the limitations, the main limitations that were recognized at the time. Layered on top of that, with the time that's passed, it's now really somewhat problematic that all of the population estimates we have published, at least the ones deriving from the model, are based on the BBS data from 2006 to 2015. And when you think about the reality that we're familiar with of many species undergoing substantial increases or declines or range shifts, that's just not reflective of the current state of things anymore. So if no other reason, the fact that the underlying data are old is motivation to move forward. So is this one advance? There we go. So the next few slides are just a quick summary of the paper that is hopefully on the verge of being published in Avian Conservation and Ecology. They've accepted our payment. I'm just waiting for the proofs and confirmation that it'll be out there, but it should be hopefully in the coming weeks. And I did already present a summary of this to PIF Science just a few months ago, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's a connecting piece between the past and the future. And so also for the sake of those who didn't see that overview, I'll just spend a couple minutes on it. So this is an excerpt from the abstract, and the highlighted portions are really the key things that the new approach that we've got is a way to integrate data-derived estimates of detectability for hundreds of species and the range-wide relative abundance surfaces from eBird, and then the spatial trend information from the breeding bird survey into a formal Bayesian model. So that's integrating a lot of new and advanced components. For detectability, we're largely using the NAPOPS work that Brandon Edwards led a few years ago, and this is still the most comprehensive source out there. And now that we have these high resolution, spatially explicit models of relative abundance from eBird, we can incorporate those that weren't available the last time around as well. We can use that now to generate new population estimates and their associated uncertainties. And because of that spatial modeling, it can now be done for custom areas, not just the political boundaries and BCR boundaries that we had before. And one of the most interesting aspects, I think, is that we now have the opportunity to generate estimates for a given single year, not just averaging things over the 10-year period like we did before. So the detection distance, that's the NAPOPS. This is the paper in IBIS that described that in detail. So far, the effective detection radius, or EDR, has been estimated for 317 species. So obviously that's still far from all of the North American species, but it's something that we hopefully can build upon. And it's one of these elements where we've got it available, we'll use it, and where we don't, we'll rely on other options. And just as a reminder, the effective detection radius is the distance at which the number of birds missed within that distance is equal to the number of birds outside. And so it's based on distance sampling models and a database of hundreds of thousands of records. Obviously, it's not perfect either. It depends on where those records come from. There's different levels of coverage depending on the species. But ultimately, it's data-driven. It gives us a specific, species-specific number. And on balance, we feel it's more defensible than the broad distance bins that were used previously. The geographic bias element is highlighted by this example that we included in the paper, where you can see that for canyon wren, for example, the BBS routes, little black squiggles, for the most part are in areas with really low density, the density coming from the eBird model, whereas in the areas of highest density, there's just no coverage. And then you can have the opposite sort of situation with American robin, where your black squiggles tend to be most concentrated in this southern part of BCR5, or Canadian BCR5, which has the highest density, and in the areas of lowest density, there's less. So you can really skew things if you don't correct for that. And so that's now been built into the model as a calibration element. The temporal trends, as I was saying, if you just take the average, not only does it kind of set you back in time, but it can be misleading. And so especially, if you look at the example of the robin, it really wouldn't matter that much whether you take the current or the average of the 10 years, would be a minor difference. But if you look at the canyon wren, the average might be, kind of representative overall, the midpoint that is, but you get more value from it when you can see that the most recent estimate is less than half of what it was earlier in that 10-year period. So there's a lot that we can, a lot more insight that we can gain now by being able to plot this on an annual level. I think this is the most interesting figure from the paper, though, because what it does is it illustrates how these factors interact and which ones have the greatest influence. So we have the geographic bias, the trend, the availability, and the area. Uh, and the first three factors, the bias and the trend and the availability, you can see that there's a reasonable spread in terms of how that factor shifts the estimate relative to the existing population estimate. And for those three factors, some it becomes a little bit smaller, some a little bit larger, but except when you get into availability, the magnitude for the most part is fairly close to where it is. Where the big difference comes in is in terms of area. So this is the replacement of the previous distance bins with the EDRs. And so for this subsample of 13 example species that we used to illustrate the model, you can see that in all cases, that change of distance results in an increase in the population estimate relative to before. And because the magnitude in many cases is larger, this shifts the overall factor once you figure in all these ups and downs, so that most species end up being with somewhat higher population estimates than before, although a few do drop down. And so, taking this example of common nighthawk at the bottom, uh, the reality is that the availability of nighthawks from the perspective of breeding bird survey sampling was overestimated previously, kind of correcting for that better now, realizing the BBS doesn't do a great job of it. That brings down the estimate to what we would hope is a more realistic level than what we had before. And then at the opposite end, you have some species like scarlet tanager and purple martin that are pretty much an order of magnitude higher once you factor in all of these adjustments. But on average, the new estimates are roughly double what they were previously. So now we shift into the future and kind of setting the groundwork for the version 4 of the population estimates database. And what we've set out with the paper is that we have an approach now that is intentionally modular. So you can mix and match the inputs of those various parameters to suit what is most appropriate for a given species. The challenge is to identify in a systematic way what those optimal inputs are so that it can be replicated and simply documented and understood what we've done. And really that, to me, seems parallel to what is being done with ACAD, for example, where there's different ways of identifying the inputs to the various scores there. And those are documented and referenced accordingly. And I think that's the kind of model we want to move toward. But figuring out how to make those decisions is the first step. So there's several factors here that we want to individually consider for a given species. So what is the basis for area correction? We can use the EDR from NAPOPS as our default, probably. But we also have the QPAD estimates for a lot of the boreal species from the Boreal Avian Modeling Project. If neither of those is available, or for some reason that we define, we consider them to be unreliable, we can fall back on the existing PIF distance bin for that species. There may be cases where ARUs can be used to derive more data-driven estimates. And maybe there's some other sources to consider for given species. So there's a lot of options there. What is the rule set that determines which one of those is best for a given species? Similarly for availability. We saw on the previous slide that can really make a difference in where the estimate ends up. So we have an estimate of availability for the same species from NAPOPS. From the modified SQPAD version, a lot of them have it as well. We've got a time of day correction that was used previously in the PIF models. That's an option. And then there's all sorts of potentially custom ways of modeling the covariates as well. So same question, how do you decide which of those is most important or most appropriate for a given species? Then we have the relative abundance. What is the source surface we use? In the examples I was showing you, the default was the eBird surfaces. They're available now for almost all species. It's a good basis to work from, probably, but is it always the best? No, probably not. So again, with the Boreal Avian Modeling Project, they've got relative abundance services for many birds across Canada now. And we're starting to look at that, and there no doubt are some species for which those models are better, especially when you get into the far northern distributions than the eBird is. So maybe for a boreal bird, boreal species that's primarily in Canada, maybe we would default to the BAM model. We have the grassland models, the ones that Barry has spoken about in the past. They might be the best thing to use as a starting point for some of those species. Audubon has models, they're breeding bird atlas distribution models. Again, lots of things to consider as options. For the trend component, we'll probably use the BBS by default, but obviously for some species, there are better sources. So we need to define how to plug in those. And then we still have the pair correction issue, which we didn't really touch in the latest paper because it was well, it's complex and we just didn't really have any new insights into it. So we kind of punted it down the road, but it's something to consider again here, whether we just default the existing PIF expert assessment. So for example, for some species, doubling it, assuming that primarily males are detected, or keeping it at one if there's an equal probability of detecting males or females or somewhere in between. There's also been some discussion about whether now that we are doing more advanced modeling of availability, maybe this is overlapping it so much that we're kind of double dipping and we should just drop it. So that needs to be explored, but it's part of these things. So whether we have a single decision tree that you can kind of follow through all of these things, or we have what I've been calling a grove of trees, where basically each one of these is a separate tree, and you just determine the individual outputs and then plug those separately into the model. Either way, that's what we have to develop. And it's worth noting that for some of these elements, we have a subgroup within the population estimates group that's focusing on detectability. And so they're really diving deeper into analysis of the area correction and availability components. And we're hoping that what they come up with will inform the options for the decision tree. Another important priority for this next version of the database is to expand taxonomic coverage. So in that last version 3.1, it already increased coverage somewhat by including these species for which expert-derived models were incorporated. So that was a good step in the right direction. And then the 3 billion birds paper used another 60 or so species, mostly waterfowl and water birds, where the same model effectively was applied, but the database has never yet been updated to include the output that was used in that paper. So there are effectively three paths that we can use into expanding the next database. So we can apply the new model that we've developed using the decision tree. And if we find that the decision tree basically tells us that the model is not appropriate for that species, then we have to look at other alternatives. So the second is that we just adopt existing estimates that are published elsewhere. So obviously there are waterfowl estimates, shorebird estimates. The Arctic Prism has estimates now for a bunch of not just shorebirds, but water birds as well, even some land birds. We could simply include those for completeness. And then we could kind of double down on this solicitation of expert opinion. There surely are some species that were not included last time for which that is an option for getting the numbers in there. And that's where I think that, PIF Science here and with all of the connections that we have could reach out to some of the experts to pull in and fill some of those blanks. The only kind of cautionary note there is that these second and third options are probably not going to have the same estimates of uncertainty for the most part that we can build through the model. And certainly they won't be scalable and mappable in the same ways that the others are. So it might pose a little bit of a challenge in terms of uh, integrating them into the database and using it. Uh, and so we have to have a little bit of discussion about the pros and cons of doing, like, being complete versus being completely integrated. Uh, the way that the database has been structured so far is that the output is at continental, national, state, province, and then that state, province by BCR intersect levels. And the intention is to maintain that because that's useful for a lot of users. Just to note that with the revised BCR boundaries for Canada, having split the BCRs 3, 6, 7, and 8 recently, and tweaked the boundaries of 12, those will be incorporated when we get to that stage. But I think the more interesting potential is the possibility of going beyond that now. So because the basic output from this new revised model is a posterior distribution of abundance. It's basically a map derived output now, and so you can generate an estimate for any custom area, and that should be really useful for end users. You need to kind of have a sense of what the abundance of species is within a given area for any kind of land use planning. But it could potentially be useful also in the review process, just for kind of that ground truthing and comparison with existing spot mapping and data, and understanding, is this a realistic output that we're seeing? So we could have some kind of a map-based interface. Obviously, that's dependent on other elements as well in terms of hosting and technical capacity and so on. But from an analytical perspective, at least, I think that is something that we can foresee as being possible now. So the review process, I kind of hinted at in the last slide, and I think we have to be realistic that when we're talking about hundreds of species and all of the spatial scales that we're considering, we can't expect everything to be scrutinized at that level, or we'll never finish the review process. What we need is some targeted comparative reviews so that the anomalies can be spotted, and that we can use those to fine tune things. Whether that's a matter of going back and just reviewing what we came out through the decision tree, or whether there's some kind of bug input that doesn't make sense. So what we're trying to figure out is what is the best way for reviewers to look things over. And the simplest version is to produce draft output in a spreadsheet form, where you would have the population estimates for a region. You could probably produce the densities as well, knowing the area of the region. And then you could simply manipulate that sheet with filtering and sorting and what have you. And a given reviewer could focus on species they're familiar with, regions they're familiar with, and identify their concerns, provide suggestions, annotate with sources, etc. That is appealing in the sense that it would be fairly easy both to produce and to probably compile review from. But we were also discussing that a more advanced option would be to have an interactive Shiny app platform where reviewers could look at what the model output is, but then also have the option of picking different options from that decision tree grove and seeing what the implications are. And you might find that no matter what you pick, the population estimate in a given area doesn't change very much, or that maybe if you make one different choice, it has a dramatically different outcome, and one may be more credible than the other. Again, comparing against what else we know for the species. Obviously, that would require some more development effort and time, and we'd have to figure out a way to capture the feedback there because it's not an automatic. You can't just add a column for your notes. But if there's a sense that that would be helpful in really understanding what's going on and zeroing in on any required changes, then maybe that's something we should pursue. The timeline here is obviously subject to capacity of everyone involved, and it's perhaps a little bit more optimistic than is realistic, but I figure better to start that way than not. So we are in the process of starting to develop these decision trees, and that's hopefully something that we can make substantial progress on over the course of the spring. We want to then identify the species that are really suited to the current model. So by default, I think that would be all of the ones that we've used the previous model on, plus probably those 60 or so that Ken used in the 3 billion birds paper, and perhaps some additional ones. But I flagged in red here that this would also be a good time to really start recruiting reviewers so that as we start to generate the results, we have people that we know are basically on call to either review a group of species or review all species within given regions, and we can mix and match. But I'm hoping that some of you here will be willing to do that and to reach out to others who may have regional or taxonomic expertise and would be willing to refine some of this output for us. If things go well, then we can hope for some preliminary output from the model over the course of the summer, where I think first we would have the working group review that output and see whether there's some obvious surprises and anomalies compared to existing information. We then do some corresponding adjustments, and then at some point in fall, winter, provide those second round of draft output for that team of reviewers to dig into, and we could do a workshop at the time to kick that off and make sure that everyone's got a clear marching orders on how to look at things and what kind of feedback to provide. And then, possibly as early as next spring, we could release that next version of the population estimates database. And we'd want to have a corresponding documentation with it, like we've had for the previous versions. But we also need to then communicate that release within PIF Science and also beyond to all the potential users. And so we're already thinking ahead a little bit in terms of the communications. And we figure that from that preliminary analysis that we did for the current paper, on average, the population estimates look like they're going to be 2 or 3 times larger than what we had before. And so obviously that means that if we had 3 billion birds lost and the starting point was 2 or 3 times that, well, it might be that we actually lost 10 billion birds. And that's not the headline we're looking for. And we certainly don't want to make it seem like we had doubts about the way that previous analysis was done, because the issue was that was based on the percentage of birds and an understanding of what the population estimates were, and that hasn't changed. So we really need to ensure that we send the message that you can refine the analyses, and that can have a big impact on the actual population size estimates, but it doesn't mean that there has been an increase in birds or that it's good news. It's just a change in scale. And then just briefly looking a little bit beyond that immediate version, kind of like when version 3.1 was published and we already knew that there was more to do. I think we can already foresee that as the population estimates are now going to be year specific, that basically every time that there is a new release of BBS data or other substantial trend information, you can basically update things again. And how frequently we do that, I don't know, but probably we would want to have it somewhat more often than the 5 to 8 year cycle that has been the case, even if the model doesn't change. We've discussed a couple of times that with using the eBERT density models or other distribution models as a base, because those are already now integrated with ACAT, there's the potential that the whole population estimates could be integrated more fully. We just have to cut away the pros and cons. Obviously, having everything in there in one place is easier. But if we're adding complexity to the population estimates in terms of these multiple sources and factors, and we want to document all that, it may make sense to keep them as two separate databases and just cross-reference the population estimates as appropriate. And of course, we know that the model, as it stands in all of its components, are subject to ongoing tweaking. There are specific concerns we remain aware of, that colonial nesters, crepuscular nocturnal species, and birds with really specific habitat requirements are not yet being handled well by the current model. And those are things where, as we do that customization of inputs, we might be able to address those elements to some degree, but no doubt there's going to be room for further improvement with those as well. So I guess from your perspective, what we're looking for is, if you're using the population estimates database currently and into the future, does it meet your needs, and how could it be improved? In terms of our objective for expanding coverage, are there individual species or groups of species or regions for which you or someone could help with the review to ensure that we have good, complete coverage for a peer review? And then, kind of in parallel with that, are there species that you have data for or links to data for that we could use for those that aren't going to be available through the standard model? And lastly, if you want to be more involved on an ongoing basis, you're certainly welcome. We have a relatively small core group and could use some help, especially as we try to build out this fairly major product. We typically meet at this time, so 1:00 Eastern on the third Thursday of every month. Sometimes we have some additional ad hoc meetings when we have a specific priority on the go, but that's our default. So feel free to reach out to me. My email is there, or to anybody else in PIV Science, and they can connect with me as needed. But I'll leave it at that. And if anyone has thoughts or questions, I'd love to hear them.
Thanks, Marcel. That was really helpful. And nice to see your very ambitious timelines there.
Yeah, well, I think I got to have
we'll
hope.
stick with it. I love it. So I just had a question about the proposal for the Shiny app. And so would the idea be that you would publish the sort of new updated version 4 estimates according to, I guess, what the working group thinks is the best representation, and then the Shiny app would supplement that for people who want to go in and looking at adjusting the different covariates changes the estimates?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two possible uses for it. One would be kind of that exploratory review phase, but it could potentially be available after that. I don't know, Adam, if you want to jump in because I think it's more kind of uh, you're more familiar with how these things operate, and we've used them for uh, Canadian products
Yeah,
before.
but I think you've summarized it nicely. There are a couple of options. Neither approach would be simple. It would be a significant deal to build something like that. Um, Even just for internal review, that would be there'd be a big back end to something like that. But it's certainly possible if we think we need to have that sort of facility to drill down into the details, some of the different model options. In terms of the map-based, exploration tool for an external audience, yeah, it might be a little bit out of my wheelhouse. We might want to get someone who's more skilled at that kind of web and app uh, development.
Yeah, I guess so. The reason that I was asking is I could just see that if a user is coming or a partner is coming and they just want the estimate for the population for a suite of birds in their region, they would maybe find it frustrating if they can't just come and like say, okay, here's what Partners in Flight is suggesting, or the sort of most appropriate calibration for this model for this species, and then be able to
Right.
run it there and just get the answer. Like if you're just coming and looking for that answer and you're not the
No,
person that
I
wants
think
to
you're right. I
come
mean,
and
we would
try and
have to have,
evaluate.
yeah, we would have to have a like this is what our output is. And that's why I'm thinking that it's probably more for that exploratory review phase that it's useful.
Yeah.
When we actually figure out what it is, then the other output I was describing of a map would be sort of there's different products out there like this where you can draw a customized area on the map
Mhm.
and get a list of the species that occur there and their corresponding densities, population estimates, and things. That the way to do that is way beyond my technical capacity, but I know it's possible. And given the way that the model output would work, at least for the species going through the model, we could do that. And then it would just be that hiccup of the ones that aren't modeled in that way. How would you generate output from them so they don't get overlooked by that? So there are definitely some wrinkles to think through.
Thanks.
Wendy?
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Thanks. Great job, Marcel. Great leadership. Herding cats. Awesome summary. Can you share that presentation? I think that would be helpful. And
Yep.
I was wondering if when you were talking about review and you said review by regions, I was wondering what you are imagining as regions. And then I've kind of lost the thread of exactly which taxon are included in this, but I
As many
guess
as possible.
yeah. So I guess too, I mean, this is where, bringing that conversation up about the marine bird conservation regions and what we're going to
Mhm.
use, I think would be probably, sorry, I'm not feeling that great, but would be appropriate to when consideration population estimates. And then we're thinking about that seabird taxon. So we probably need to start thinking about that bird
Yeah,
conservation
and
region
that is
boundary
another
on the marine side, sorry.
yeah, the marine bird layer is something we'll have to figure out. I mean, in the case of the population estimates for seabirds, a lot of them will be colony based, and so that'll be manageable in that regard, probably. But uh, seabirds certainly are one of those groups that we've had that have not been in the population estimates database. They're in ACAD, but it would be great to have them in here. And I think uh, there's resources we can tap into. But back to your first question in terms of what is a region, I think it can be reviewer defined. So if someone wants to look at a particular BCR. And basically, we can say, hey, here's the 200 species in this BCR and our population estimates and relative densities for them. And you can sort them and look at, okay, these are what the model says that the top 10 most abundant species are in the BCR. And you as a reviewer say, well, 8 of those make sense. 2 of them, you got to be kidding. There's no way there's this many, and do things that way. Or, you could do, all of southeastern US, if that's your
Right.
range, whatever the case may be. We're not going to prescribe what the limits of someone's review capacity is. It's more, what does a reviewer feel comfortable providing feedback on?
So I did see the mention of the province gone, state gone, which is
Yes.
kind of like the Adams approach to having those bird conservation regions nested within those jurisdictional boundaries. So there's still going to be some flexibility to review related to that, or have we just rolled everything up?
No, the thing really is that the actual output will now be pixel based. And so you can amass those pixels into whatever form you want. If you want them by BCR, if you want them by BCR by province, if you want them by province only, if you want them by country only, you can roll it up to whatever level you want. And so, from a reviewer's perspective, perhaps, your BCR 11 by Alberta, for example, might be something that
Yeah.
a particular reviewer might know. They might not be familiar at all with what the status of birds is in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but they can say with confidence that, these are the densities that make sense in that part. So maybe it makes sense to review at that scale. If you know the whole BCR, if the whole province, review at that scale.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Ken?
Yeah, just I was having a thought when we were talking about the output, the map-based output and the technical aspects of that. I mean, if the mapping and the kind of stepping down by region is already kind of happening within the eBird model, and the eBird, output already allows you to do that, percentage of pop by area. I'm wondering whether we might be able to do an additional collaboration where it's essentially that's calculated on the eBird side with Partners in Flight providing that total population estimate. And then maybe it's already built in so that people could derive the population they're looking for from those areas directly from the eBird model, or some way that we can go out to the eBird model and back, or something like that, rather than building our own spatial engine, is what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
and no, it's a good thought. And in part, it'll determine or be determined by how well we find that the eBird model fits. So, if that is our basis for the vast
Right, in
majority
the
of
case
species,
of
that
this
works.
being, eBird,
Yeah. If there's a lot of species for which we find that a different distribution surface is better, then that would be more awkward. It's good to consider.
Well, BAM could do it too. I mean, it could be that, I mean, those programs have the spatial capability, so, and it's unlikely we could build our own, is what I'm thinking.
Possibly. And again, I don't know the capacity there, but it's kind of an ideal vision. Pete? Can't hear you. Still can't hear you, I'm afraid.
How does that work? Is that
Yes,
better?
that's good. Yeah.
That's a little better?
Yep.
Sort of. Okay. Yeah, I wondered about using pixel-based approach to provide getting population estimates for any particular area, and that really sounds cool. My worry is that you will get a whole bunch of people jumping in saying, gee, I want to know how many birds there are in my city park here. I know there's 18 robins there.
Yeah.
What does the model predict? And oh, it only predicts 3. Oh, well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking
True.
if there is some form of guidance at which you can say, these kind of polygons are going to, to what extent can you shrink them down into small areas without losing any reasonable estimate, that sort of thing. And that might depend on what part of the continent you're in, depending
Mhm.
on the underlying sample size, or maybe it depends a bit on the resolution of the habitat that you're using underlying the model. But anyway, just saying that
Yeah.
some form of guidance might be useful.
Well, that's a great point, Pete, and I think it speaks to the fact that we really have to think about the communications around this product when we get to it, both the the technical and the more user based. So that's an important one to keep in mind, and just bearing in mind time and Sarah's gentle nudge in the comments. I think we probably should wrap it up there and move on to the broader discussion. But thanks for the feedback. Happy to get more of it at any time. And we will try to keep in touch with folks in terms of the connecting to the broadening of the scope as we move forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcel, for that. And yeah, we're happy to have you back for interim updates as things move forward and as you are looking for